Hey everyone, welcome. Let us know down in the chat if you can hear us. We think we're here and live. This is Ryan. I'm with Permaculture Action Network, and Leah and Alexa and I are here today hosting Cliff Davis. And we're so grateful to have Cliff joining us.
I'm having fun.
In addition to hosting these online workshops and panel discussions, we're also running a fundraising campaign. Our organization, just like many, lost a bunch of funding that we usually be using right now to do permaculture action days on the ground with different place-based projects and community organizations around the continent. So instead, what we're doing is we're running a crowdfunding campaign so that we can do this just transition mapping work, where we are mapping the spaces and sites across the continent that are providing the just and regenerative alternatives to the extractive economy, so that people like yourselves can link up with those projects and organizations and sites and start building out the better world that we want to see, and we can phase out this extractive world that we don't want to be a part of anymore. So we'll put the crowdfunding campaign link into the chat in just a moment. If you want to put in your message of support, Agroforestry workshop, please do. And just so everyone's aware, Cliff has offered up to give us his time and energy today without us sending him part of those donations. So those donations will be going fully to Permaculture Action Network this time around, unlike the last two. And we're super grateful for Cliff to be doing that. So thank you very much, bro.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, bro. And sister. Sisters. Uh-oh.
Leah, I believe you're muted, so just unmute and then come back on.
Thank you, Ryan. I just wanted to give a brief overview of Cliff and why we wanted to invite him in. We've a couple of us have co-taught with Cliff before, or he's taught at a lot of our permaculture action days, or in my case, I had the opportunity to take a full 3-day agroforestry workshop with him down at his farm in Tennessee, and just seeing all of his small scale systems and the way that he teaches really makes it accessible for each of us in our own backyards and small spaces. So I don't know what else to introduce for you, Cliff. I think I'll just pass it straight off to you.
All right. Well, hi, I'm Cliff. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm standing in the middle of our agroforestry, small-scale agroforestry gardens. It's basically, just to give you a little history, we started out as Spa Ridge Permaculture. We've recently closed that business, and now we have Pig and Leaf, which is actually a farm operation. It's a permaculture farm operation, and a lot of it entails a lot of agroforestry at the small scale. We're a 50-acre farm. It was clear cut, and we've used agroforestry, agroecology, and permaculture to regenerate the landscape and revitalize the kind of the planet that we live on here. So I'm just going to go over some basics of agroforestry. So forest gardening, alley cropping, and also some little bit of earthworks. I have our small scale agroforestry system is very entrenched in the earthworks part. So I wanted to show you some of that as well. And we don't have a whole lot of time, so I'm going to try and just stay in one general area and talk to you about the systems that we have involved and what's working, what's not working, and where do we go from here. So I'm going to flip it around here and show you what I'm looking at. Okay, so this is an alley cropping system. Alley cropping means that there's a treescape. So that's this right here: peaches, plums, daffodils, all kinds of plants in this particular guild. But it's also on a swale, and at the end of that swale is a pocket pond. I've shown you the swale here. It goes kind of that way. Those are my notes, by the way. And it goes into a pocket pond. It overflows, and most of the landscape does this. It overflows and then goes into another swale that's right here. And then it fills up another pocket pond and goes down the hillside. these are the alley crops that we have. This is one of our blocks of greens, baby greens, and carrots. You can see we make a living as market gardeners, and so these crops are really important to us to keep our cash flow going, which is something that's not really talked about a lot in farming. You can have all these tree crops, but they take a while to start bringing in fruit. And then once you start bringing in the fruit, you have to make sure it's not diseased and it looks nice and to sell it. So in order to do that, we have to also have cash flow crops. So these are our alley cropping systems. These are no-till beds that we use throughout the farm here. This is just one little block that I'm showing you right now. A lot of the stuff that you see native landscape, but also a lot of cultivated landscape. The idea is that we want to increase the amount of ecology so that we can buffer any problems later on that might come about. Let me push that thing. And so what we have, I'm walking back down here to the other swale. This is an apple and elderberry swale. On the top of the swale, we have various different amorphas, which is a nitrogen fixing plant. We also have aronias, which is a really high quality berry that is probably one of the highest phytonutrients that I know of actually on the earth, and it's native to the eastern deciduous forest. You can see some of it's hard to tell because of the vegetation, but now I'm standing in the swale and I'm walking up to a pocket pond. And these ponds, they're vernal pools. So a vernal pool means that in the spring, when we get all of our rains, we will actually, these will actually fill up, and then they will become habitats for frogs and various smaller mammals for drinking water, and then also predatory animals and insects and bugs to keep the balance of the ecology going. You can see right here, here's one of our apples kind of in full bloom right now. Let's see if we can get it. There you go. There's a bloom to keep all y'all happy. We want to see the blooms. And then you can tell that it's a really dense planting. There hasn't been a lot of chop and dropping going on as of yet, but that's kind of the next phase, is we'll start chopping and dropping a bunch of these understory bushes and shrubs that you see right here. We'll start chopping and dropping those. A lot of those are native weeds, but also planted clovers and vetch and various other things. You can see some clover there. So kind of following in the lines of Fukuoka, but also trying to keep it real and practical, because we want to also make money. And profitable permaculture has not been really explored enough as far as I'm concerned. And in order to make this work, we actually have to make it sustainable at the profit level. And I'm going into a forest garden here. You can see our greenhouse back there. That's our propagation house. This is a forest garden here. That barrel right there is a Jadam liquid fertilizer. Jadam liquid fertilizer. We've got peaches in here. This is a forest garden that we built about 8 years ago. Plums.
Hey Cliff, if I can just interrupt you for a second. We're just having a little bit of trouble with your video being pretty pixelated. So would you mind to just like slow down as you're moving the camera? We can hear you really well, but I think if you move the camera a little more slowly, we'll get better quality.
Okay, I forgot about that slow moving. I was trying to act like a turtle, but I wasn't doing so well. And then you come into this area. These are areas, some of the things we found out is by having such dense tree crop systems here that outline our flowers and vegetable crops, we found that we actually have a lot of problems with weeds. And actually, we also found out that we have a lot of problems with rabbits and deer and rodents, because they harbor themselves in this habitat that's perfectly suited for them. So we've had to explore new ways of keeping our sanity and less weeding and better crops. So this is an area that we just trying out our landscape cloth. So we'll see how that goes. And then you can see more flowers over here. I'm going to walk. I don't know how slow I can walk, but I'm going to walk really slow. So here's some flowers. Maybe I'll get to a little bit more of a lighter area. So these are all alley cropping systems. And then I'm going to walk over now. Unfortunately, I have to walk again, but I'm going to walk over to this is more of the forest garden. It kind of looks like a big jungle, which is kind of what it is. I'm going to walk back over and talk to you more about plant guilds and how important they are in a system. For instance, this plant right here is a mulberry. It's a very great plant. It also has a vine growing up it, which is a ground nut. And this tree over here actually has a ground nut going up it too. And underneath has rugosa rose and various different cover crops that are growing up underneath it. There's also some irises in the pond there. And then there's a black willow. But the key to guild planting is to actually go into nature and find out what's working together. I've learned a lot in nature just by looking at service berries and what they grow near. I look at just random oak trees and see what likes to grow near them, what grows near walnuts. I found out most of the information that I have is actually from nature itself. And I just try and mimic those. I have studied the books, but the books and the reality are usually a little bit different. As I would suppose you would probably agree with me. But we're also trialing many different types of trees so that we can find out what species actually grow really well here. I might be able to get into a sunnier spot. And, we're also growing things like your typical comfrey, but we also let certain weeds just grow. And the reason why we let those weeds grow is because they're actually beneficial to the landscape as long as we can keep the seeds down. And I think agroforestry has a really huge transition possibility within the agricultural world because it can create much more habitat for birds and much more habitat for anything that's in the ecosystem, but it also helps to supply added buffers for wind protection, for shelter belts for the animals, and also for timber later down the road or fence posts. For instance, we have an area here that we actually grow our own fence posts. Another thing I like to really talk a lot about in agroforestry is the ability to kind of diversify your crops and trial those things and see how they're going. And then if they don't work, just pull them out, but I have 10 different types of peaches. I have 8 or 9 different types of plums, several different types of chestnuts, 40 different types of apples. And it's really important whenever you're starting an agroforestry system to consider the fact that you need to learn how to propagate all of that material. So you have to learn how to propagate cuttings. You have to learn how to graft plants, graft trees. I've grafted all of my own trees. We've taken most of all of our own cuttings. We start stuff from seed. So it's really important to have a small scale nursery whenever you're doing agroforestry systems. That does not have to be big at all. It can literally be the size of 10 by 10 area, 20 by 20 area, small little greenhouse. The other thing that's important in agroforestry systems is allowing the flowers to flower. You want the flowers and everything to go to its full life cycle so that you can get the bees and the all of the different insects and beneficials that are helping you out. I am actually going to go over to an area. I'm going to show you a forested ecosystem that we've been using pigs in for a little while. Here we go.
Hey, Cliff, I'm going to interrupting really briefly just to let the people watching know. If you're on a phone on the app, there should be a little box at the bottom of your screen with a question mark in it. If you're on a computer, you should see towards the bottom of your screen, ask question. And you can go there instead of the chat and feel free to ask questions. And then throughout the tour, people can upvote the questions that they want to hear the most or that are the most important to them. Then when we get to the Q&A a little bit later, we'll be able to prioritize the questions in order of which had the most upvotes. So feel free to do that for the folks watching. Also, Cliff, once in a while, if you're not showing us something directly, feel free to flip your camera around so we can see your face once in a while and then flip it back. But totally up to you, whatever's best on your end.
I think I'll actually do that now. I had to charge my phone a little bit, so. So I'm there, right? Okay. It's really important to, like I was saying, to have a lot of diversity on the farm. Biodiversity is one of the biggest things we're losing. It's critical. We're losing up to 200, some people say even more, of species a day. So that, which seems to be an astronomical number. You wouldn't think that there's that many species on the earth, but there is. And we're losing them very fast. And forested ecosystems are basically, that's the teacher. That's the thing that we're trying to mimic. I live in the eastern deciduous forest. And so that eastern deciduous forest is the very thing that I'm trying to mimic and capture all of its resources. How does it work? Its functions, its strategies. What is it doing? What kind of plants operate well? Where do the birds go? Are they in the lower areas, the middle areas of the tree system, the forested system? Those trees provide so much for us. On this particular property, the existing trees that did not get logged in the beginning, we use for firewood, we use for lumber, we use for shiitake mushroom logs. If we have a chipper, we can chip that material and put it on our orchards, or we can also use it and make biochar, which we put that into our pig feed to make sure the pigs are healthy. There's all kinds of possibilities when it comes to the forested ecosystem, and it's nothing that we're going to learn in one lifetime. You know, you have to remember that the majority of all of the ecosystems, the forested ecosystems on the earth, have been totally tampered with. There's not many that used to look like, 100 and 200 years ago. So it's ever evolving, and we have to adapt to it. And there's a lot of learning curves. I've experienced so many learning curves just with a great idea. You have a great idea when you're in your permaculture design course, or you have a great idea when you're doing some permaculture design work or taking notes or scribbling in a journal. And then you put those on the ground, and when the boots hit the ground, sometimes those things don't work. But what you do is you replicate the things that do work, you get over it, and then you just move on. And you start to find a rhythm and a pattern, and that includes what species to select, what kinds of animals to integrate. I mean, we live in a forested ecosystem. There's a really good animal that loves the forested ecosystem. So we have pigs that we rotationally graze in and out of the woodlands. And sometimes we're in about the second or third succession of our regrowth. So to explain succession is an ecological, some people say it's a continuum, but it's a really easy way of expressing it. But succession is whenever the ecosystem goes into a disturbed state and then it regrows back. And what usually happens is that there's disturbance, and then a year or two later, you start to get blackberries. A year or two later, you start to get real big thickets of trees and berries. And then another few years later, you'll start to get different species starting to pop into that system. And then over a significant period of time, allowing nature to work, you'll get a canopy, so to speak, but you always have disturbance. Disturbance is the only normal in an ecosystem. It always happens, whether it's a fire, a flood, winds, tornadoes, it always happens. So it's kind of the manager. And if you think of it as if you think of it as like a theater, you look at the plot, the very thing that thickens and makes you wonder what's going to happen, and you never know what's going to happen. That is succession. It's always changing. You're wondering what's going to happen. It's always there. And the actual ecosystem itself and the context of where you're at, that's the actual theater, the stage, so to speak. And then you have the consumers and the decomposers and the producers. Those are the mushrooms and the microbiology of the soil and all of the birds and the predators and the people and everybody that's doing their job, so to speak, in the ecosystem. So to understand agroforestry and to mimic forested ecosystems, we have to really understand and be adept at understanding the patterns and the techniques and strategies of ecosystems. Do we know that? I don't know. I try to be as objective as possible, but I'm also trying to make a living. So there's a balance within that. The reason why we choose agroforestry and to put forested ecosystems back on the landscape is because they provide so many basic needs to the landscape. You have to remember that a tree is a pump. That's basically what it is. It's a mechanical pump. It pumps nutrients and moisture from its roots through its vascular system and then out through its leaves, transpiring it into the atmosphere, creating clouds and rain and etc. And the opposite, it brings in nutrient and it brings in all kinds of water and through its leaves and then back down into the roots. So you think of that as like a torus shape. It's just going like this. And it's just constantly pumping. So without the trees, we can't have the water. And without the water, we can't have society. And without society, we can't have humanity. So we have to really look at trees as a significant part of an ecosystem. And they're actually quite enjoyable to look at. I think a lot of people like trees, but also they provide habitat. They provide so much habitat, and also they provide so many different functions for the landscape and for the people that are farming them. It's whether it's mulch that they get from the leaf drop in the deciduous forests, or you get lumber, or you there? I had a phone call. Sorry.
Yeah, we got you.
So there's other systems of agroforestry that are also important to think about. So I like to say that there's 7 different practices in agroforestry. Those are alley cropping. So when you have crops in between tree systems, there is silvopasture. So wide spaced trees with pasture underneath, usually 50-60% light and 40% shade. And then you have riparian buffer zones. Those riparian buffer zones for instance, look at most of the creek banks and rivers. They're denuded of all their trees. They're denuded of the majority of the ecology that needs to be there. So we can replant those, and those will buffer against the extremes of agriculture and development when that all of those chemicals or those pollutants want to enter the stream. They'll actually get they'll get buffered by the actual tree systems. There's also the forest garden system, which is mimicking the forested ecosystem using many different types of plant material, from trees to shrubs to vines to roots to herbaceous plants, etc. And then you also have hedgerows and shelter belts, which are really important when it comes to wildlife habitat, but also when it comes to trying to keep the high winds off of your livestock or off of your crops that you plan on making money off of. And then there's the ones that I like to add. Well, there's one more, forest farming. So that's actually going within the forest and setting up beds for ginseng or setting up a nursery. And then, or also having a shiitake log mushroom business or an oyster mushroom business, anything like that, using the already existing forest. I would like to add Coppice Agroforestry. Coppice is a technique that's really ancient. It uses a technology basically of cutting the tree at a certain height, and then that tree will actually regrow or resprout. And then that resprout can be utilized in various different ways. And then there's also a pollarding system, which is a higher, you would cut the tree at a higher height. Usually it's above the brows of an animal, and then it will regrow at that height, and then you can harvest it. You can make tree hay out of it, which is something that nobody talks about very often. We've been experimenting with that for a couple years. So basically taking tree branches with the leaves on it in June, July, and August, and bundling those up, letting them dry, and then storing them for hay in the winter. Before grain, there were trees. The majority of everything was tree fed. And then I would like to add another one in the South, especially, and also on the West Coast, is bamboo. Bamboo is an excellent agroforestry alternative crop. It has over 1,000 applications. It can buffer so many different pollutants from the waterways and extremes that you might have. It has very many uses as far as edible. We feed it to our chickens. The leaves, we feed it to our pigs. They love the leaves. It's a large forest grass. So, and then you can also use it to build trellises around the farm, or you can build buildings out, like chicken coops, stuff like that. And so those are the 7 different types of agroforestry that I typically like to tell people about. And there's also some newer stuff that people are working on, like syntropic agriculture. You see a lot down in the tropics, but that's a whole other talk in and of itself. So I think I'm about charged up here. I'm sitting on my 4-wheeler. I'm going to walk over and show you some of the forested systems that we have. And then we have some pigs in there right now. And I'm going to flip you around now.
Hey, Cliff, while you're walking, someone asked, what about bamboo for commercial purposes?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, hold on. Commercial bamboo? Well, in China, they make plyboo. That's a bamboo plywood. You can make all kinds of different utensils for the commercial area. Clothing. You can make clothing that is actually antimicrobial and actually you can use it's kind of like a linen. And then of course you can use it for any wood alternative, you can make fuel out of it. You can make art out of it. The commercial uses are pretty extraordinary as far as an alternative to wood products that we have, which are mostly from pine plantations. Just a little history about bamboo. Bamboo was brought here by F.H. McClure back in the 30s and 40s at the same time that they were trying to get pine established as a paper product. And the alternative was to have bamboo as a paper product. I actually have some bamboo toilet paper, to tell you the truth. I bought a case of it. It's the best toilet paper I ever had. They didn't have any at the store, go figure. So I had to buy some at online. But bamboo had research sites throughout the entire Southeast, and it was slated to become a very large industrial product. But the people who financed the pine industry, Rockefellers, Carnegie, all those people, typical, they actually helped support the pine industry, which is really, it's basically a desert. If you really think about it, especially down here, you just have pine plantations everywhere. Nothing grows under it. Once they take it out and harvest it for paper or pulp, it's pretty much worthless for a while. So yeah, it has multiple commercial uses. I'm going to turn around and show you some pigs. Any more questions?
That's great for now. We'll have a few more questions soon.
Okay. I'm flipping. All right. So we have a forested system here. It might be a little bit hard for you to see. There's some of our greenhouses. Full effect. But we have a forested system here. Now, what we're doing here is a little bit of the opposite. This is a forested ecosystem that there's some of our pigs. They're just doing pig things. The interesting thing about this is it's a little bit too dense. It's never been managed. The forest in the eastern deciduous forest is actually fire dependent. Hence why we have so many ticks, is because we probably could have more and more fires or small scale fires that would actually help these forests. But see, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get multiple canopies. So here's a small tree, and then there's taller trees. So we want the grandpas, we want the grandmas, we want the siblings, we want the brothers, the sisters, and the grandchildren all in one system. So what we do is we go in here and we start taking out trees that are injured or diseased. And then if there's too many in a certain area, we will actually that we have to take out, we'll take them out. We'll make lumber out of them, which I can show you some of our lumber, and we will replant in there also. So a lot of the trees in here come out for lumber. They come out for firewood. You can see here we leave. I'm walking in the paddock. There's a pig sleeping. Hey, girl. We also leave dead stands. This is something in urban settings. When I was an arborist, I used to always leave dead stands. This is a dead tree, and you can see the holes up there. That's an important tree to leave in a landscape. Most people would take that down. Why? Because it's habitat. It's a dead tree. It can be managed slowly and surely, but I'm walking my way back out. So we mostly harvest from here firewood and lumber and shiitake logs, which I'm going to go over here now and show you some of our energy sources. So here's our firewood. We're still chopping and stacking firewood. This time of the year, we've got different various stacks. We're completely off grid at our homestead, and we cook and we heat our house on firewood, and everybody else that lives here heats their house on firewood too. There's various people that live here. That's an old pig feeder. And then, of course, here's some other of those forest farming products. We have shiitake logs. I think we have several hundred now. We're getting ready to do few more hundred whenever we quote unquote get the time. And then I'm going to switch back around. So those are some of the systems that I can show you that are right here. I don't know where we're at on time.
Yeah, if you want to maybe go for 5 or 10 more minutes, and then we'll switch more to question mode.
Okay.
Or we could go ahead with questions, whatever you prefer. Maybe if anyone wants to put in if they'd like to go into more depth in a particular system or see something else on the farm in particular, feel free to chat that into the box and we can ask Cliff to direct his energy toward that. I know as you're walking, there were a few more questions about some things like, have you considered guinea fowl for tick management on the farm?
I have. I'm showing you right now. This was out of a load of trees. This is all oak. We just got it back not too long ago. That's going to be building part of our processing shed for our vegetable processing. And now I'll go back to the guinea fowl. I have tried guinea fowl. I really didn't like them. I think they're too loud and annoying, and they might be really good at taking care of of ticks, but they were really annoying. So we ate them. They didn't last. They taste like a tame pheasant, but I think that they're good if you can handle that all of their talking, so to speak. They're an interesting bird because they move in like organisms. Ducks are very similar. So some of the animals that we've done out here are ducks, chickens. We still have chickens. We've done several different types of ducks. We've done lamb, which that didn't work out so well either. And it's not that it didn't work out. It was just too early for them to really be a part of the system. And I didn't have enough labor to handle moving them enough. And so I got rid of them. We've also had goats. I don't like goats very much just because they're hard to keep in. And they always find the best trees to eat. I had green tea growing for years, and I had a goat get out and ate every one of them to the roots. That was a bummer. I thought I was going to have my own caffeine source. So are there any other questions? I can't really see very well unless I put my glasses on.
Yeah, I mean,
gosh, yes, I'm standing at the top of my property. Yep.
At the top of your little watershed there.
Yep, I'm at the top of the watershed, and back behind me you can see water. There's actually 2 water tanks. That one's getting ready to go on to the packing shed, and there's one that's white behind it. That's our 5,000 gallon well that feeds all of our houses and does all of our irrigation for our farm. And it has a 5,000 gallon tank there that holds all of the excess water. Everything downhill, all the animals, all of our houses, everything's gravity fed from there.
Yeah, I was literally just about to ask you if there was a big water tank up there, because
there's several actually. There's
I'd expect
1,
it to
2,
be
3, 4. There's 5. Yeah, and they're all at the top of the landscape, and they can easily be tapped into with a pump to fight fires. And then below that, all surrounding the entire intensive cropping system is what we call a bench swale or a terrace. And we can actually back flood those terraces. If a fire's coming up the hillside, we can back flood them. That's called designing for catastrophe. We had a fire come up the hillside when we first got here, and so we designed that in pretty quickly. And we have a volunteer firefight department. So basically it takes them forever to get here. Bless their hearts, as we say in the South. But we thought we would try to fight our fires on our own too.
So one of the questions that we got is just, books and recommendations for learning more about agroforestry.
Well, anything that's, go ahead.
Yeah, no, any favorites of yours?
Yeah, anything that Stephen Gabriel does is really good. I also like all of Dave Jackie's. If you want to be an intense designer, you want to study Dave Jackie's work. There's all kinds of Reading the Forested Landscape. That's a old book. I think that's the name of it. I don't read too much anymore. I would highly suggest getting a woody perennial. It's called, I think the guy's Michael Durr. It's a woody perennial propagation book. That's really important to have. It's worth every price. My inspiration mostly comes from, I can't believe I can't remember his name. A Permanent Tree Crops, A Permanent Agriculture. That's one of the biggest, in that book, Russell Smith, Smith talks about pigs and the forested ecosystem. And that's what really inspired me to kind of get things going out here. And I'm trying to think of some other really good books that I've read recently that were outstanding as far as the forest is concerned. Anything that has to do with your local forest is really important. Talking to the division of forestry people is important. Going on native plant walks with people that are specialized in that. That's really important. I think it's more important than actually reading books. But I do think getting into the landscape, then there's also the mushroom side of it and the wild foraging side of it, hunting. We hunt out here. We hunt deer, we hunt rabbit, we hunt squirrel. It's either they eat our stuff or we eat them. So, and it's extra protein. So, so there's the hunter-gatherer part of these kinds of systems as well.
Thanks for that, Cliff. Since we're kind of transitioning toward Q&A, we can make a little more space for you to show us some live stuff as well. But we do have another question about the soils there, about how did you come to understand them and how has that influenced your design?
Well, so we're on top of a ridge, and the soils here are basically rock and clay. There's very little topsoil, except on the north side of the slope. I've noticed that there's more topsoil there. We did studies and we've been doing tests probably for about 7 or 8 years. So the studies, we just do pit studies. So we just dig a big pit and then start to look at the different layers of the soil profiles, which basically was a 1/2 inch to 2 inches of topsoil, and then 6 to 12 inches of subsoil, and then mostly just rock and clay. And then we do tests on our soils, especially our production soils. We do tests on those using an Albrecht test through Logan Labs. Another important test that you should always consider doing first before anything is a water test. You want to always make sure your water pH is at a certain level, because if not, then the nutrients that you're using on your crops, they won't be able to uptake it if the pH is wrong. So knowing your soil and then knowing what to do. What are those strategies? Chopping, dropping in your forested ecosystems, rotating your animals more often than not, which is very difficult. We're not good at that all the time because we have so much going on. Mulching, either you mulching with wood chips on your trees or mulching with different hay or straw for your vegetables or any production gardens or kitchen gardens too. We also have been trying mulching with just compost. The biggest thing that you need to understand is you need to get carbon into your soil, no matter what kind of soil you have. So it's all about organic matter. And we pay attention to remineralization. We pay attention to soil food biology. We also pay attention to the actual physics of the soil as well. That's kind of the three-legged stool of soil health. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a few more. Are there any other live systems you want to show us, or do you want to just keep rolling through Q&A?
Well, I'm charging my phone right now. Let's do a little Q&A right now.
Great. Sort of tied into that soil question, someone asked, can you talk about nitrogen fixing trees and their benefit to agroforestry systems? And then what trees specifically are good candidates in Middle Tennessee?
So nitrogen fixing trees, it's a controversial subject. For some trees it is. But mostly what they are is mostly from the Fabaceae family or legume family. So they can be clovers all the way up to trees. Black locust is one, for instance. I'll show you one here in a minute. The black locust we use a lot on our farm, but we use it mostly for bee fodder. It has great flowers for bees and honey production. Right now they're in full bloom and they smell gorgeous. You kind of wake up in the early morning and the dew setting and you'll get a whiff of it and you kind of try and figure out what it is. And it's usually a flower off of the black locust trees. What we're utilizing in our systems are clover, easy to manage, easy to chop and drop, comes back with vigor. The more you chop it, the more it likes to come back. You have to be really careful grazing it though, especially with pigs because they like the roots. And then moving up from there, we use vetches, usually hairy vetch. We plant that every fall and that gets chopped and dropped and then it gets browsed or grazed by animals. And then my favorite of all nitrogen fixing plants is the Amorpha species or genera. I'm sorry. The Amorpha is Amorpha fruticosa, Amorpha canadensis, and Amorpha californica, and Amorpha. There's one other one. But they are basically false indigo bush is what some common names are. That's a hard common name because everything kind of has a false indigo name. But they're basically all of legumes. And if you chop them, they will regrow. But as soon as you chop them, the amount that you chop is released also in the root matter. And that releases nitrogen in nodules in the form of bacteria that the actual roots will have little bacteria nodules on them. And those actually work synergistically in the soil and then release whenever you chop and drop or graze. They'll release those nitrogens and help to supplement the nitrogen or basically the internet that's underneath the ground. I hope that answers it. Y'all there?
Yep. Sorry. I think that answers it there. Feel free to ask any follow-up questions if we've asked your question live. Yeah, I think we can just keep moving through the questions. There's another one from James. We're just buying our first 50 trees and looking to fund more. What venture helps to build biodiverse systems the fastest? I think he's asking specifically in terms of finances.
Whoa. When it comes to finances, you have to look at the short term, what's going to bring you cash flow, and then the long term. And then there's some medium in there too. A cow, for instance, is a long-term investment. You're not going to get any beef for several years. And you need to have a lot of land to handle cows. And it's a big investment. On the animal side, cash flow would be something like chickens. You know, the kind of Joel Salatin style chickens. They're turned, every 2 weeks you're harvesting, if you get it right, of course, or every week, some people. But, you know, that's a 6 to 8 week bird. You're making cash flow. You're making about maybe 40% on the dollar if you're good. And of course, that depends on scale. You know, the other thing that's not talked about is that there's a scale of economy or economy of scale with farming too. And it's just as easy to feed 5 hogs as it is to feed 50 hogs. It's not very much more work. And that's the economy of scale. Pigs are a midterm investment. They bring you a pretty good cash flow, but not for another 7 or 8 months. For instance, one pig, I usually have about $300 or $400 in it by the time it goes to the butcher. So if I have 20 hogs on the ground, that's $8,000 that I have invested, but I make 4 times that on my investment. So my investment, I don't know any 401k or any Wall Street, anything like that can give you that kind of an return on your investment, or ROI. With vegetables, your fastest production is going to be intensive market gardening. And what those entail, the high-end crops are kind of fast days to maturity crops. So you're looking at salad greens, radishes, beets, turnips, things that people love to eat. They're raw. They can't keep them for a long time, and they're going to buy them from you again, hopefully next week. Microgreens are a perfect example of a fast cash flow. And you have to have the cash flow, you know, or having a job. You can have a job outside the farm is another way. I hope that answers some of your questions.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And thanks for talking about the ROI. It's difficult sometimes in this work to explain to people that, you know, a lot of what we're doing as folks that are working on regeneration and a just transition is creating a social and an ecological return on investment that won't necessarily be a financial one. And then, of course, part of this transition is figuring out how to make a financial return for the people doing the work while we're still navigating our way from the extractive economy and to a just and regenerative one. So thanks for touching on that. We have a few little clarifying questions coming in, just so folks know. We're taking questions over from Facebook and YouTube and bringing them into the Crowdcast. James just wants to thank you via Facebook for answering that last question about the returns. And the next one is from Lydia Koltai, who asks, how many acres do you manage? And have y'all done any fire management? I think you touched a little on design for emergency before, but first, how many acres do you manage? And is this your only site, or are you involved in other sites nearby too? And then maybe you can touch on the fire management.
Yeah. We have a 50-acre site. We probably only manage, I would like to say, half of it, something like that, is in productive systems. I do not do fire management. I've always been scared of it. I wish I have done it before. Usually I have had fire ecologists, friends of mine that are out here that tell me about how it works, and that we've discussed things, but I've never put fire on the ground on a purpose to burn anything. I have accidentally done it. And the one thing about fire is that I think, and I want everybody to understand this, I think it's a great tool. However, it is very dangerous, and you need to know what you're doing. So I have not done a whole lot of that as far as a management system is concerned. It's a form of disturbance. So we use the pigs to disturb systems to either restart them or even set them back, or to regenerate them to the next phase.
Another question comes from Herzl on Facebook, who asks, do you guys have any date trees on the farm?
Date?
Yeah, dates.
No. The only date you can grow here is it's called a false date. It's a jujube. So it's not really a date.
Yeah.
But the date palms are mostly in Mediterranean climates, Turkey, Greece, stuff like that.
Great. And then someone asked, what's the return rate for mushrooms? I think they mean, what kind of like productivity will you see over time? Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I have a lazy shiitake mushroom log production system because I'm so busy doing everything else. Basically, we harvest. We have a natural system. We harvest whenever they're ready. I tried to soak and I tried to do all of that. The problem with shiitakes is that there's a lot of people doing them. So if you're going to do mushrooms, I think it's really important to do kind of more specialty mushrooms like pink oysters and yellow oyster mushrooms. They have a beautiful appeal on a market table. Chefs love them. They're very perishable, which means if you can sell them, you'll make money. And you can keep making money. And they're relatively easy to get into. A shipping container, a simple greenhouse. You can start mushroom production in bags. That's a very quick way. Within 2 or 3 weeks, you can have a turnaround on production and be making money. And you have to remember, everybody, it's easy to farm. It's hard to sell what you farm. So that's a whole different ball game. You can be a farmer, but your farmer is third. First, you have to be a business person. Second, you have to be a marketer. And third, you have to be a farmer. So when you're thinking about these things, you have to really, really think about, what is my business proposal? What is my business outline? Do it the real way, like you're starting a business, and look at your cost of production, your inputs, your outputs, your labor. Labor's 50 to 60% of our inputs. And always remember that nature bats last. And sometimes you just can't win when it comes to farming crops that are really difficult to farm, especially if you're wanting a quick return.
I really appreciate you talking about the realities and the difficulties of this. And I guess I want to ask you a question personally, the 2-minute, 3-minute answer. Why do you choose to do this at the end of the day when there's pathways where you could make a living for you and your family that are more extractive to the land or more extractive to other people's labor? But there's easier ways of going about making a life. Why do you choose to commit to a regenerative, a just, a mutually beneficial way of living with the earth and with the other people around you? Why have you chosen this pathway?
Yeah, that's a pretty deep question. I think, I got into this after college. I went to college, got degrees, all that stuff. And I didn't feel like I could do anything in this world with any of the degrees that I had. And so I went on a sabbatical, and I found that working with the land, which was part of my life, my childhood, I was raised fishing, hunting, gardening. We raised rabbits, chickens. So I kind of was raised that way, and then I went away from it and brought back to it. But I think personally, it's more of a spiritual thing. And I think it still is, it's like the Fukuoka thing where, the ultimate goal of farming is not the cultivation of crops, but the cultivation of hearts and spirits of humans, trying to be a human, which is related to humus. And humus is the earth. So I felt very connected to people like Henry David Thoreau, any of the 19th century philosophers. And then I got turned on to permaculture 20 something years ago. And I said, man, this is what I want to do. I just knew it in my heart. I knew it was the right thing. I knew the extractive economy and the war machine that we belong to was just not part of my vibration. And it's still not. And to this day, I wake up every day. I know what I love to do. I get out of bed loving what I do. And it's tiring. It's hard. There's long hours. I probably make maybe 50 cents to $1 an hour
My workers make more money than I do probably, but we're turning that around and we're making an income. But the most important part is that we take that surplus and we put it back into the system. I could buy tractors and I could work by myself, but I don't have tractors. I got a 4-wheeler that helps us getting up and down the road. But we don't have tractors. Everything here is hand done. We feed the animals with buckets. We have some water lines now. We used to water them with buckets. Everything is all by hand. And it's an intimate, I like to say it's visceral. And if you don't understand what visceral is, then I suggest you try to find out, because it's a part of our DNA. And once that DNA clicks and you start to understand the good things that you're doing, then you can know you can die right and die well. And that matters to me. And I didn't want to raise my kids in a system that was, like we've been talking about, the system. Babylon.
Thanks for that note of inspiration, Cliff, and insight into what motivates you. It's 5:34 right now, Pacific time. So we said we'd wrap on the half hour. So we're a little bit over. Great. If it's okay with you, it's okay with us. If anyone needs to get off, you can, circle back later. Just one more call for questions. If anyone has anything still lingering to ask Cliff while he's still got him on. I don't see anything else on our side that we've missed, but if you want to take a second and type anything into the chat or the ask a question feature. And then I guess while folks are mulling that over, Cliff, is there anything else that you feel is important to share?
Well, it's really strange times right now. And I'm not sure what I feel about it, what I think about it. I've been trying to figure it out, probably a lot like all y'all. But I think this is a call for us to really rethink everything we're doing. And the best thing we can do is just be silent, take our shoes off, walk on the earth, hug a tree, hug a friend, as long as they're part of your quarantine, I guess. And also try to sympathize and empathize with others in this mess, from the right wing to the left wing to the centrist to the ups, the downs, the people getting bailed out, but not us. And I think right now we need to show that we have compassion, and that compassion and love and support and friendship can actually be the very thing that moves us forward. And that's all I can say. I just think we're in troubled times. I've been waiting for this for like 20 something years. And I never thought it'd be like this, but I just wish people the best, and I hope everybody's healthy and stays healthy, and take care of yourselves. That's another big thing. Something I don't do enough. I work too much. I sleep too little, and I don't pay enough attention to my kids. And you can always pay more attention to your loved ones. You can always pay more attention to the land. You can always grow a tomato in a pot on a balcony, and you'll be the best tomato you ever had. And you can always support farmers locally in your region. You don't have to become a farmer. You don't have to become a landowner to support these types of systems. You can share your resources. That can be your knowledge, your money, your skills, your whatever it is. But I think it's time to really start looking at how do we care? Because that's the ultimate goal of permaculture. It's care. And care is a healing modality. So if we look at the essentials, that's what matters the most. Whether or not everybody's got a garden, I'm not sure that matters the most. I think what matters the most is that we're loving each other and that we're taking care of each other, and that we actually take any extra that we have and we give it to others, and we do our best doing that every day. That's what I got.
Thank you. We got one more question that we're going to wait till the very end. But
Okay.
before we get there, how can we find you? Do you do tours? Can people come visit? Can people find you on the internet, website, social media? How can we find and or visit and or support you and what you're doing?
Yeah, so we're pigandleaf.com. We're in Summertown, Tennessee. We have tours on our farm, usually about 2 or 3 times in the summer, starting in the spring. Well, actually starting in May. Well, it depends, right? We'll see. Pigandleaf.com. We provide local food items for the Nashville area. Mostly, I don't teach anymore. I used to teach. I still do design services and design work, but I'm pretty selective on that as well. I don't do a lot of that anymore as I'm trying to actually integrate more into the landscape. And I'm also I'm concentrating a lot of my efforts on creating a collaborative farm, kind of an agrarian neighborhood. And I've been trying this for a while, and I've been not so successful, ups and downs and lefts and rights, but it's new territory for me. I'm getting up to about 50 years old. I think I can still work for another 30 or 40 years, but I don't know. So we have to find succession, and that's a really big thing. So we have internships. We usually take on 1 or 2 interns a year. Each season, we usually have one during the summer season and then the winter season. And I think that's about it.
Great. Well, I can't say that I'm not sad to hear that you're not teaching anymore. Co-facilitating that permaculture design course with you out in Tennessee a few years ago was really incredible. I learned so much from getting to co-teach with you. So thank you for that. I'm glad I got it in before you took some time off or retired. Just want to let folks know as we're going to wrap up, and then we'll have a couple announcements about some more online workshops that we're having in our digital permaculture action hub here. And then we'll ask the last question for you, Cliff. But just so folks know why we're running this fundraising campaign and what this just transition map really is that we're doing, we want to make it ever more clear to people where they can find the different land-based projects and sites that are doing this kind of work. Doing this kind of work in a city, doing this kind of work rurally, making food accessible to people that usually don't have access to nutrient-rich food, starting to return our relationship as people with the land to one of mutual benefit and symbiosis, right? While we're also solving for the ecological, not only the ecological, but the economic and the social crises that we all face, right? So these places that are creating community-led solutions, and those are the sites that we choose to do these permaculture action days with when we do. It's really important to us as an organization that we don't focus energy towards ourselves and try to act as if we know the solutions, but instead that we act as a catalyst that directs attention and energy towards all the people on the ground like Cliff who are doing this work in local communities. So that's really what we exist for. That's why we, do outreach at a concert or at a festival and try to get 300, 400 people come out to an action day on a permaculture farm or at a community site. It's because that's where the energy needs to be directed, and that's where we try to direct that kind of attention. So this just transition map that we're building will be another way of doing that, a way that people can find the local community spaces and sites where they live or close to where they live, and start working with them and taking agency in the process and co-creating new organizations and new collectives and new actions and things like this. So if you can, please go over to the Flip Cause for those who have the means. If you don't have the means, please don't worry about it. We are all about people being able to pay what they can if they want to, and not turning anyone away for lack of funds. Our action days are always free to participate in, and we always try to make our courses free or affordable for those who usually don't have access to that kind of educational space. So thank you so much for joining us. Leah, do you want to let us know about the next couple workshops that we have coming up in the Digital Permaculture Action Hub?
Sure. On Saturday, we've got Natalie Flores of Safe Place for Youth down in LA talking about stewardship in action during coronavirus. She's an urban farmer who's set up a lot of different strategies for meeting the demands of her community during this time, and is passing out seeds, and just wants to share some tips and strategies for how folks can do that kind of work in their own communities. So that's this Saturday, the 25th at 2:30 Pacific, 5:30 Eastern. And then we also have Mark Lakeman of City Repair and Communitecture. We're featuring him next Thursday, April 30th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And he'll be talking about, the workshop is called Rejoining Our Power, Badass Transformational Infrastructure. And he'll be sharing experience and ideas on how to collaboratively design and implement mutual aid infrastructure and regenerative commons. So tune in for those. You can register via our Facebook page. You'll be able to find the event page and register at the Crowdcast. So a few links to find it, but they're also in the chat if you scroll up just a little ways. And stay tuned for more. We're trying to keep producing this content and would love to hear from you all what you're most interested in. So if you have a particular subject or a teacher you'd really like to see featured, then please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find us on Facebook or contact@permacultureactionnetwork.org. And we will do our best to respond to what y'all are interested in. And I think on that note, we'll wrap up. And the last question that came in feels like a good one to end on. So someone asks, Cliff, what's your favorite tree crop personally?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, it's changed over the years, but it used to be apples, but apples are really difficult to grow here. I would say the chestnut is my favorite tree crop, hands down. It gives you the same amount of nuts every year. They're really delicious. They grow very fast. They're perfect firewood. They coppice really well. Pigs love them, and I make more money on chestnut finished pork than just regular finished. So I'd have to say the chestnut.
Amazing. It's one of my faves too. Well, thank you so much, Cliff, for joining us. It's been such a pleasure having you, and thanks for coming out of your not teaching anymore retirement to share what you're doing and what you know. Yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you again. Mm-hmm.
Anytime. Thank you all. It was lovely.
Miss you, Cliff. So great to see you.
Yeah, you too, brother.
Thanks for everything.
Yeah, thank you. Peace.